Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Onion Soup, the show where we pull back the layers of metaphysics and reality to demystify spirituality. And today we have a wonderful guest with us, Miss Alyse. How are you doing today?
I am great. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. So we were talking about how you teach breath work, but more specifically on how you help people work through ancestral trauma when those starts to come up in their lives.
So I discovered breath work at a very young age. I was just 19 years old. And then it's something that I've been doing for about 23 years. I've developed my own breath work methodology. And then I also was a school counselor for over 10 years. During that time, I had a lot of experience working with traumatized children. I've kind of coupled my abilities as a breath worker and also my experience with trauma and my ability to see trauma and heal it in the work that I do now. So I've created a methodology called the metamorphosis method where I use breath work and these other trauma healing tools that I've created to help people permanently shift familial and ancestral trauma, specifically, not only like big events that have happened in their lives, but just also stories that they have or beliefs that they have about themselves that are stopping them from creating what they want to create in their lives.
Ooh, so let's dive into that. How does your you said metamorphosis,
Mhm.
how does that work differently than other forms of breath work? Is it like pranayama? What is it like?
So the breath work that I teach is called conscious connected breathing. It's very simple and very gentle. And I use that in coupling with the trauma tools that I teach to move energy in the body, create momentum, and also dive into the subconscious mind. So breath work is one of the most powerful tools to quickly access the subconscious mind. And that's where all of your, you know, limiting beliefs are, your unhealed trauma, unconscious wounding, just things that have happened in your life that you are operating as a result of, but you're not aware of. So when you use the breath work, it gives you access to the subconscious in a really powerful way so that you can become aware of the stories you might be recreating or beliefs you're projecting onto your reality. And so that you can choose out of them and start to change.
So does this breath work kind of man, my throat. Does
No,
this
mine
breath
is
work?
too all of a sudden. It's so weird.
Yeah, I was like, let me grab some water really quickly.
Our
Right?
throat chakras are opening right now.
That's what it is. So when you have someone doing breath work to go deep into looking at their traumatic past and their subconscious, are you taking them more into like a meditation or is it like a regression? What's happening to the patient?
Yeah. So basically, I've created different breathwork sessions that are specifically for different types of trauma. So there's four main types of trauma that I help people clear. The what I call the birth story, which is the circumstances from conception until 3 months old, like the circumstances
Mm,
around your conception up until you were 3 months old, like what your mother was feeling, what was going on in the world, all of the stuff that impacts you that creates like an energetic imprint and a lens through which you see the world. So there's your birth trauma, the mother wound, the father wound, and then the sibling wound. And I have
mm,
specific types of breath work that I talk you through. So I have these like audio recordings where I talk you through accessing the subconscious around those specific topics and then moving the energy around that and having awarenesses around what it is that you need to know in order to shift and clear whatever is holding you back about that specific thing. And then coupled with the trauma tools that I have, which basically are around drawing parallels and seeing patterns. So I show you how to look at the dynamics inside of your relationships with your parents and with your siblings, and how whatever you did not get inside of those relationships or whatever was damaging to you inside of those relationships is something that you are recreating in your current reality in an effort to heal it. And then I show you how to take that information and use it to navigate your current relationships in order to heal those dynamics that are no longer working for you. So, like, for example, if somebody is like, oh, I just always pick the wrong partner. I always choose somebody who's emotionally unavailable. And it's like, that's not actually what's happening. You're just recreating one of your most dominant relationships with your parent in an effort to heal and reconcile it. So I show people how to understand that and address what's actually happening instead of what they think is happening so that they can navigate it and shift it. So the breath work is a integral part of that because it brings you into a different state where you can access things inside of the subconscious that you wouldn't normally have access to, so that you can widen your perspective and start to shift some of these things.
Wow, I love that, and the reason why I love that so much is a lot of times you have people who don't know why certain cycles in their lives keep repeating,
Yes.
and it does tend to deal with your parental figures and the people that were heavily involved in your life as a child, and you're just trying to heal that, you're trying to reconcile those memories and those issues.
Exactly. And I think once what happens is people don't realize what's actually happening inside of a situation. So typically if you're in a relationship and your partner is triggering you, you think it's like, "Oh, I just wish they wouldn't do this or I wish they wouldn't say this." But what's actually happening is the 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old version of you is being who's wounded and didn't get what they needed is being triggered in that moment and is reacting to their partner as if they were that age. So if instead of making it about your partner, you address your 5-year-old or your 4-year-old and say, I'm listening to you, I'm acknowledging you, I understand how you feel and what happened, and you give them what they need in that moment, then it starts to open up a pathway for healing instead of trying to get the other person to change, which is never going to change anything.
Yeah, for sure, and the other thing that I like with that I love that. So, the other thing that I like to do personally with me and my partner is that when we do have issues like that, because 'cause I'll have something that'll come up, and I'll recognize, "Hey, this is a traumatic event from my childhood or my past," but then we'll go back later and talk about it and say, "Hey, XYZ is what triggered me. I know that it wasn't you, but I do want to, bring it up and kinda help, see if you can help me work through that." Because
Mhm.
sometimes talking through it is so helpful.
It is because it really opens up a different doorway when you're able to acknowledge what is actually happening, like you're describing, like you're able to take responsibility for why you're feeling the way that you are instead of just blaming the other person, which is what most people tend to do. And it's not their fault. They just truly think that it is the other person, you know? So I think that's such a powerful opportunity that we have inside of our close relationships is to be able to look at the other person and be able to see and have context for like what they're reflecting back to us so that we can heal and reconcile
Yeah, for sure. We're all reflections of each other, right? So,
it.
one thing I really want to dive into before we get too far away from it was you were talking about preconception trauma. Can you
Mhm.
go a little bit more into detail about what that is? And is that the same thing as ancestral trauma?
It can be. So there's definitely some overlap, but typically, whatever the energy is around your conception and then everything that was happening while you were developing in the womb, that has a huge impact on just the way that you see the world, the way that you see yourself, what kind of life you think is available to you, what you believe you're deserving of, what the kind of place you believe the world is. So, for example, if you were developing in the womb and your mother was going through a ton of stress, or maybe her relationship with your father was not good and they were breaking up, or she was afraid for whatever reason about her own security, then you're literally developing with that energy as part of your cellular makeup, as part of who you are becoming. So it will create, a lens or an imprint of how you're going to see the world and what you're expecting the world to be. So if you were developing and your mother was going through this tumultuous time and didn't feel safe, then you can ultimately be looking at the world as like, am I going to be safe? Will I get my needs met? And not even realize that that is how you are looking at everything. So the birth story is really, a collection of energetics and experiences that create this way that you see the world and the way that you expect the world to be. And then additionally, the energy around the birth will also impact your ability to start things and your ability to bring things to completion. So, whatever energy you associate around your birth is like the way that you will start stuff. So a lot of times, if people have a traumatic birth, or when they come out of the womb, something traumatic happened, like, they had to go into surgery or whatever, then a lot of times they could have trouble starting things because on a very subconscious level, they're expecting something traumatic to happen when they start it. And I see this for so many people who experience that, like, failure to launch kind of thing, where it's like they have this great idea and they know what they need to do to bring it to life, but they just don't. And they're like, why am I not doing this? I know I want to do this. And a lot of it will have to do with birth trauma. And it's a really powerful missing piece for people that, not a lot of people talk about, but when you can really delve into what the energy was around it and have a context for that, it can help so much with moving through bigger things in your life. Like, I'll give you a quick example just to kind of bring it to life for you. When my mom was pregnant with me, my parents were both teachers. And in 1981, when my mom was pregnant with me, it was the biggest teacher strike in history ever in Philadelphia. It was the longest teacher strike ever. So my parents both were not working and they had no idea how they were going to make money. It was very scary for them. They had no money. They were scared and they literally had nothing to buy for me or whatever. They didn't know when they were going back to work. And that hugely impacted the way that I see money and just the way that I feel secure in the world. So money was always something that creates a level of fear in me. And it is directly related to what my mother was experiencing while I was in the womb. So that's something I did a lot of work to shift and reconcile and heal. But that's the kind of example that it's really important to look at as far as what was going on when you were developing in the womb. And also, I just want to say, if your parent is not around or you don't have a good relationship with them, you don't need to ask them anything. With the tools that I create, the breath work and the meditation that I have around birth, you can uncover the things that you need to know because it's all living in your subconscious.
I love that. I also love how you put out there that you don't necessarily have to talk to the person in order for healing, and that goes for all forms of healing, because even when it comes to, certain types of aggressive trauma, and it's like you want to forgive the other person or whatever,
Right.
sometimes it's not necessarily safe to do so. So I'm always a big advocate of, if it is safe for you to ask, and it is safe for you to go talk to this person, then do so, but if not, write it down.
Yeah, it's
And
not necessary. And especially for those type of situations like you're talking about, if somebody
mm,
was, abused or a victim of some kind of aggressive thing, it is not necessary to talk to that person ever. In fact, I don't even think it's necessary to quote unquote forgive them. I think it's just
mm,
important to reconcile it within yourself and forgive yourself for whatever way you might be thinking that you had anything to do with it or you were at all to blame. But I don't think it's necessary. I feel like that's a little forceful to be like, oh, you need to forgive this person. That just feels like
yeah.
way far away. You know what I mean? And not really helpful.
Yeah, and I feel that because a lot of times when we talk about forgiveness, it's a forgiving that person definitely does not forgive the act, and you're more so freeing yourself. So it's not necessarily forgiving the individual or anything. It's a, like you said, I forgive myself for allowing myself to go through this pain for so long. I allow myself to let go of this. So that's the type of forgiveness that we're talking about.
Yes.
But not to get too far away from everything else. I just
No,
think that's really important, you know?
that's actually in my program, The Metamorphosis. One of the modules I have is it's called the forgiveness diet. And it's where you write 7 times, or no, for 7 days, you write 70 times a day. I forgive myself
Mm,
completely. And it's a really powerful process because as you disentangle from all of the family stuff, it is an important part of the process to forgive yourself for whatever way you're holding yourself in contempt, or you have shame or guilt around things that it's important to let go of. So that's a huge part of the process.
I agree, and it's also, to me, I think one of the most difficult aspects of it because when you start going through life, one thing that, at least I'll speak for myself, going through the spiritual journey, the more aware and more awakened you become, you start realizing the craziness you did in your past. You know? And I realized I was like, "Oh my god, I did all these crazy things. Who was I? What was I doing?" But it took me a while to accept them for what they were. That's just who I was at the time, and I just
Right.
didn't know anything different. And I can just choose to do better now. So that's what that forgiveness looks like. The forgiveness is being okay with the way things turned out, for better or for worse.
Yeah,
And
and also,
moving
like, I always say too that, like, we always do the best we can with the tools we have at the time, and it really is true. Like, and even if people develop coping mechanisms that are not so healthy, they're still just trying to figure out how to be okay within the circumstances that they're in.
Mhm. Yeah, and then coping mechanisms evolve over time, just as we evolve over time.
Yeah.
Before I was a very heavy drinker, and that was the coping mechanism I had, back during that time period of my
Mhm.
life, up until I decided I didn't want to do that anymore, and I wanted to push
Right.
past that. So do I judge myself for who I was back then? No, at least not anymore. But it takes a while. It's one of those things where I think a lot of people want there to be some switch that you flip or a magic wand that you wave, but,
Mhm.
you really do have to sit down and do the work. And
Yeah.
as we're sitting here talking about breath work and pranayama has been one of the best things for me to really push past some of those, trials and tribulations that I was going through.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And it really moves things on so many different levels. And like the great thing about breath work too is like you can shift so much and move so much
Mm,
energy and create so much change. And you don't even have to necessarily know like what it is that you release. Sometimes you will, but sometimes you will just feel totally different and you don't even need to know exactly what happened because there's things that are shifting and changing and moving and releasing on levels that are beyond the conscious mind, right? Beyond what we're even aware of. So that's why it's so powerful because things are happening on so many different levels. That's why I always tell people, like, when you're finished, like, share about your experience or write it down because if you don't, sometimes it just goes off into the ether and your
mm.
brain doesn't even fully comprehend what happened, because it's so beyond the conscious mind.
Yeah, and it's so cool to me the way that the body and the mind works in that way,
Mhm.
because you truly don't most of the times need to know where it came from. What it really is the willingness and intention to be healthy and healed and to let it go. And the craziest part to me is when you do need to know something, it'll instantly pop into your mind.
Oh, 100%. That's why I always say to people, like, you don't need, when I talk about ancestral trauma, for example, people will be like, oh my gosh, I have to figure out what my ancestral trauma is. And I'm like, no, you don't. If there's something you need to know about, you'll know. Believe me, like it'll be staring you in the face. You won't be able to ignore it. So you don't need to go digging around for it. It will always show itself to you if you do need to know about it. And then the other piece around the breath work that I think is so powerful is I think that, similar to what you said, the body just has its own innate intelligence to heal and to create balance and homeostasis and healing. We just have to give it the space to do that. And I feel like that's what's happening during the breath work is you're giving your body a container, a space to heal in the way that it's meant to. And sometimes your conscious mind doesn't always need to understand what that is.
Yeah, and it's funny because people think like, well, they feel as if they have to know more. They have to be able to go deeper. And most of the spiritual journey is all about simplicity.
Mhm.
It's only our minds, our hubris, our egos that want it to be complicated. We want it to be really, really, really challenging. But in truth, it's about just sitting down in silence.
Well, yeah, and also I think what can happen too is sometimes we can get stuck in the story of like, why is this happening again? And it's like, well, we kind of already know why it's happening, right? Now it's just about noticing it and shifting it. Like, we don't need to keep recreating the story or trying to figure things out over and over again. Once you know what your major stuff is, then it's like, okay, this is coming up again. Okay, I know what's happening. I'm going to shift it instead of being like, I need to figure this out. I think that's where a lot of people get stuck too.
For sure. So when we talk about shifting that energy, how do you shift it?
Yeah. So there's multiple ways that I have people do that. One is, like I said earlier, addressing what's actually happening. So that would be addressing the inner child. So anytime you're triggered, anytime you have an emotion come up, it is a part of you that is needing healing or needing acknowledgement or needing reconciliation from the past. So I always say immediately to tune into the inner child and just like acknowledge your inner child. And then from there, it's about tuning into like, okay, what is the energy that I want to be holding right now? And usually I'll work with people to help them create what I call like, like your highest self avatar. Like, what is that energy that I want to be holding? And how can I gradually practice shifting into that energy when I get triggered? But it's like, we want to, before that happens, be able to fully understand why we're triggered and what we need. So we can't skip over that, because then
Mm.
that's like kind of spiritual bypassing. But once you do that, then it's like, okay, what is the energy I want to hold in this situation? Like, and how can I shift my energy back into my power? And I have a bunch of different ways that I help people do that, whether it's just having like an affirmation that reminds them of that energy so they can step into it. A lot of it will be doing the breath work. And then, sometimes I will have people create these little ways that they're able to shift out of the trigger, right? Whether it's doing
Mhm.
something mindless. Like for me, it always helps for me to like take a walk or like fold laundry or do something mindless. And then I shift out of the trigger, and then I can shift my energy into the energy that I want to hold currently, or that highest self avatar, or the present moment. So it really is a different practice for
Mm.
everybody. And I actually have a program that I fully dedicate to this. Is called Real Results, where it's like how to shift your energy like from the trigger to how you want to be. And I give you some like steps that you can take to kind of create your own way of doing it, because I think that when it comes to transformation and spirituality, like, you really have to create your own way. Like, you can learn from people and you can take certain tools from people, but ultimately you have to take that like full responsibility and initiative to create what's going to work for you. So I teach people different little ways that they can implement little tools to create their own way of shifting into that version of themselves after they address the trigger, address what's happening, and then, can shift into a different energy, and really being able to tune into like this version of you, and how would this version of me be looking at this situation, or how would I be reacting to this situation. So, one of the things I have for people who will deal a lot with feeling unsafe, it's like, I'll help them connect into the energy of safety, but then ask themselves the question, if I already felt safe right now, what would I do?
Mm.
So you're like immediately just shifting the energy by asking yourself that question. Or for a lot of people who are like people pleasers and they can't make a decision because it's overwhelming, it's like, well, if I took everyone else out of this situation, what would I do?
Mhm.
So like asking yourself these little questions that immediately force you into a different energy so that you can take action and make decision from that place instead of from being triggered.
Wow, I love that. I really like what you were talking about with taking your mind off of, let's say, the task at hand, and then doing something else, putting your energy somewhere completely different that's kind of mindless. So that way you can go back to that previous task with more focus. And I was laughing because I do the exact same thing. I love to cook.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I'll sit down editing videos and I'll do a lot in one day. and I just my brain needs to shut off. So,
Mhm,
I'll just go cook, and I know to a lot of people, cooking is very daunting. To me, I don't mind sitting there for hours putting together a
mhm,
meal. But one thing I really want to ask, since we're talking about the inner child, is something that's been on my mind for the past couple of days, to be honest with
mhm.
you. As humans, is there at any point in our, I guess, human life, are we gonna be able to completely get rid of our inner child trauma, or is that something that's, like, reoccurring throughout our lives?
That's a really great question. And like, I don't like to look at it as like, quote unquote, like getting rid of, right? I think that what I really see it as is developing a loving and compassionate relationship with your inner child. So, if we look at time as not being linear and everything is happening at once, then, your 5-year-old version of you is existing simultaneously as you. So, if we can just acknowledge this version of ourselves that we've previously compartmentalized because it was too painful or too scary, or we just didn't want to look at it, if we can then open that door and bring that version of ourselves into the fold and embrace that version of ourselves, then, when you have these moments of like, if you feel unsafe or you feel triggered or you feel like, you don't know what to do, then you can like acknowledge like, oh, this is my inner child who's feeling unsafe right now. I'm going to have compassion for this part of me. I'm going to embrace this part of me. And then it creates a different type of relationship, a more integrated relationship. So it's not necessarily about making it go away. I think it's just about fully embracing, accepting, and loving, all parts of you. And then that's when, you get to really move from a different place. And one of the practices that I share with people that has worked so well with me is if you do have kids, or have nieces and nephews or friends that have kids, being able to show compassion for them, or if you find it hard to have compassion for your inner child, if you think of that child that you love, it immediately creates compassion within you. It immediately creates this feeling of like love. And, all the time. And sometimes I'll find my daughter, who's 8 now, will like reflect back to me exactly what, you know, my inner child is feeling, or exactly what I need. And if I just give her what she needs in that moment, it's actually very healing for me and my inner child. So that's one of the great opportunities, when we have kids around, is to, give them what it is that they need, and we like receive that back for our inner child. So I feel like that's another great way to access that level of love and compassion, because I know for some people it can feel a little abstract. It can feel a little bit like, how do I access this, or how do I feel this? But if you have like a real life kid, it can be a lot easier to access it.
Yeah, they'll just go start grabbing kids off the streets, though.
Yeah, like, can I hug you?
Yeah. Well, at least that's all the time that we have for today. Is there anything you wanna leave the audience before we go?
Um, no, I mean, if you would like to try my breath work, I'll share with you. I have a free breath work download that you can try. And yeah, feel free to reach out. You can find me on Instagram at Alyse Breathes, or my website, and reach out if you have any questions. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about breath work, and I really love the way that you approach the inner child. I think it's very important for integration, and as you said, to not necessarily get rid of the inner child. That's what I settled on in my meditation the other day. Not to get rid of the inner child, but to truly integrate and walk with the child as if you're a child in the room with
Exactly. Yeah.
you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of Plain Soup, and have a great one. Bye.